Judge Carolyn Fitch brought the gavel down with the clean, declarative finality of someone who has ended 10,000 arguments and finds the ending of them the most satisfying part of the work. She was already reaching for the next file before the sound had finished echoing off the courtroom's painted cinder-block walls. "Your Honor, Mr. Aldridge, I have ruled." She did not look up. The filing deadline was the 14th. You filed on the 17th. This court does not have discretionary authority to. I understand the filing date, Your Honor. The voice that interrupted was not the voice of a lawyer. It was low and measured, and it came from the gallery, from the third row. From a man in a plain dark suit who had not moved or spoken during the preceding 40 minutes of procedural argument, who had sat with his hands folded on his knees and watched the proceedings with the patient attention of someone accustomed to waiting for things to resolve. If I could have 30 seconds. The courtroom, a civil district courtroom in Fayetteville, North Carolina, with the particular institutional exhaustion of a room that processed 40 cases a day, turned toward the voice. The gallery was sparse, a few observers, 2 reporters, the court clerk at her station, the young attorney named Aldridge standing at the plaintiff's table, looking like a man who had just watched his client do the one thing he'd specifically asked him not to do. Judge Fitch looked up. The man in the third row was 84 years old. His name was Eugene Cobb. He wore the dark suit with the slight stiffness of a man who does not wear it often, and had put it on this morning with specific intent. His white hair was combed flat with a precision that was itself a kind of statement. His hands, folded on his knees, were large and weathered, the knuckles prominent, the skin deeply lined in the way of someone who had spent decades working outdoors in conditions that did not offer shelter. His posture was straight without being stiff, the straightness of something structural rather than performed. Judge Fitch stared at him. "Sir," she said, with the measured patience of someone depleting it, "are you represented by Mr. Aldridge?" "He's my attorney." "Yes, Your Honor. Then your attorney will speak for you in this court. That is how this works." She turned back to her file. "The ruling stands." "Mr. Aldridge, if your client wishes to refile, the property has already been transferred," Eugene said. Still quiet, still not raising his voice. "That's the thing. Once you dismiss it, they transfer the deed, and my family loses land that's been ours since 1931. I just need you to understand that before you close the file." The courtroom went to a specific quiet, not the quiet of disorder, the quiet of a room recalibrating whether the disorder has already occurred. Judge Fitch set down her pen. She was 52 years old, 16 years on the bench, and she had developed, over those 16 years, a comprehensive understanding of the ways that people in her courtroom attempted to circumvent procedure, and she had developed alongside it a zero tolerance for those attempts that was essentially geological in its durability. "Sir," she said, and there was an edge on the word now, something with weight behind it. "I am going to ask you one more time to allow your attorney to," he tried, Eugene said. 3 times. The continuance was denied twice, and the filing date, that was my fault, not his. I was in the hospital. I should have told him sooner. He paused. "I'm not asking you to bend the rules. I'm asking you to look at the facts once before you close the door." Judge Fitch leaned forward. "Bailiff," she said. "The bailiff, Marcus Webb, 31, broad-shouldered, with the bearing of someone who took his position in the courtroom as seriously as any operational role he'd had before it, came forward from his station by the wall. He was not aggressive about it. He was simply present in the aisle beside Eugene Cobb's row, a direction indicated by his posture without any force being applied. "Sir," Webb said, "the judge has ruled. I'm going to need you to step outside with me." Eugene looked at Webb. He looked at the badge, the uniform, the deliberate, non-threatening stance. "All right," Eugene said. He did not argue. He stood. He stood with the careful management of a man who knew his body's inventory. The right hip. The back. The thing with the right hand that no longer gripped the way it used to. He was not frail. He was not feeble. He was a large man, or had been a large man, and the architecture of that size was still visible in the breadth of his shoulders and the length of his forearms, even as the decades had reduced the overall mass. He picked up his hat from the seat beside him, a plain gray felt hat, the kind that had no military insignia on it and no pretension, just the hat of a man who wore a hat, and he turned toward the aisle. And the ribbon came loose. It had been pinned inside the lapel of the dark suit, turned inward, invisible during the proceedings, the way he wore everything that had once been given to him in circumstances he did not discuss. The movement of standing had shifted the jacket, and the ribbon caught on the lapel's edge and pulled free and fell. And Eugene Cobb reached for it with the slow deliberateness of someone who has reached for this object many times over many decades, and he caught it before it hit the floor. But not before Marcus Webb saw it. Webb had grown up in a military family. His father had done 22 years in the Army. His grandfather had framed photographs on the wall of the den. Photographs Webb had studied as a boy the way other children studied comic books. He knew what the colors of that ribbon meant. He knew the shape of the star that hung from it. He knew that the version with the small silver letter V on the suspension ribbon meant valor, and that valor meant the citation described actions under direct enemy fire, and that the actions described had to meet a threshold that the Army did not adjust downward for sentiment. He looked at the ribbon in Eugene Cobb's hand. He looked at Eugene Cobb's face. "Sir?" he said, and his voice was different now, not the bailiff's voice, but something underneath it, the voice of his grandfather's den and the framed photographs, and the 22 years his father never fully talked about. "Would you mind waiting in the hall for just a minute?" Eugene looked at him. "I was going there anyway," he said. In the hall, Eugene Cobb sat on the wooden bench outside courtroom 4 and held the ribbon in his lap and looked at it the way he rarely allowed himself to look at it. The silver star, the small V, the ribbon in its red, white, and blue stripes that he had carried in a box in his closet for 47 years and had taken out this morning because putting on the dark suit without it had felt, for reasons he could not entirely articulate, like the wrong kind of invisible. The smell of the courthouse hallway, floor wax and old paper, and the particular institutional air of a building where people brought their worst problems and hoped for better outcomes, dissolved. What replaced it was the smell of diesel and dust and the iron copper smell of blood. And the light was not fluorescent, but the white flat light of a Mekong Delta afternoon in August of 1968. And Eugene Cobb was 37 years old and considerably larger, and lying in the drainage ditch beside a road that had been a supply route for approximately 45 minutes before it became a kill zone. There were 11 men in his squad. 3 were down. The ambush had hit from 2 sides simultaneously in the way that well-planned ambushes do, and the fire from the northern tree line was heavier than the fire from the south, and Eugene had made the calculation that the northern position was the one that needed to stop, and he had made it in the 3 seconds between when the first round hit and when the second hit, which was how long calculations took when the cost of getting them wrong was paid immediately. He had gone north, not alone. Corporal James Whitfield had gone with him, 20 years old, from Birmingham, Alabama, with the gap-toothed grin and the habit of singing very quietly to himself when things were bad. And they had gone north together through the drainage ditch with the fire finding the road behind them, and not yet finding the ditch. And they had gotten to the edge of the tree line, and Whitfield had gone right, and Eugene had gone left, and the position had stopped. Whitfield had stopped it. Eugene had been the distraction, and he had known going in that he was the distraction, and the thing that the citation called valor and that Eugene called simple arithmetic was the calculation that the distraction would probably not survive. He had survived. The round that hit his right hand had taken 2 fingers down to the first knuckle, the index and middle. The right hand, the hand he'd been shooting with, and the hand had not worked the same way since. And for 47 years he had reached for things with his left hand first, and reached for this ribbon with his right, because the grip no longer being right felt appropriate. James Whitfield had also survived. He was living in Huntsville now. They talked at Christmas. The hallway came back. The floor wax, the old paper. The institutional air of people bringing their problems and hoping. Eugene Cobb folded the ribbon back into his palm and sat. Marcus Webb had not gone back into the courtroom immediately. He had stood in the hallway doorway for a moment, one hand on the doorframe, looking at the old man on the bench with the ribbon in his hand, and the gray felt hat beside him, and the dark suit that had been put on this morning with specific intent. And then he had walked to the far end of the hall and taken out his phone. His father answered on the second ring. "Dad," Marcus said. His voice was lower than usual and faster. "I need you to call Uncle Jerome." A pause. "What happened?" "There's a man in the courthouse. Silver Star with Valor. I need to know if Uncle Jerome still has that number for the VSO legal team. The Veterans Service Organization. What's his name?" Eugene Cobb. The silence on his father's end was brief but complete, the silence of someone cross-referencing something internal. "Marcus," his father said. "Eugene Chester Cobb? I don't know his middle name. How old is he? What does he look like?" "80s, big man, white hair. Right hand, 2 fingers," his father said. Webb stared at the wall. "Dad, call Jerome yourself," his father said. "Use my name. Tell him Eugene Cobb needs the VSO legal intervention team, full emergency filing, today, and Marcus." He paused. "Don't let that man leave that courthouse." Webb walked back to the bench. Eugene was looking at the ceiling, not the ceiling exactly, but through it, the way people look when they are returning from somewhere else and are not entirely back yet. He heard Webb's footsteps and came back and looked at the younger man with those dark, patient eyes. "Mr. Cobb," Webb said, "I need to ask you to wait a little longer. There are some people I need to make a phone call to." Eugene studied him. "You're not in any kind of trouble on my account." "No, sir. I'm doing this because it's right." Webb sat on the bench beside him, out of role, out of the bailiff's posture, just a younger man sitting next to an older one. "My father knows your name." Eugene Cobb looked at him for a moment. Something moved across his face, not surprise, but the particular expression of a man who has been careful about his privacy for a very long time and has just discovered that the careful was not as complete as he thought. "Your father," Eugene said. "Staff Sergeant Calvin Webb, 3rd Battalion, 47th Infantry, 1967 to 1969. A pause. "Cal Webb's boy," Eugene said. "Yes, sir." Eugene looked at the ribbon in his hand. He looked at the ceiling again, or through it. "Your father is a good man," he said. "He told me to not let you leave," Webb said. Eugene made a sound that was not quite a laugh but lived in the same neighborhood. He folded the ribbon into his breast pocket. He picked up the gray felt hat and turned it in his hands. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "I've still got a case to argue." It was 41 minutes before the door at the end of the hallway opened. What came through it was not a single person. It was the VSO Emergency Legal Intervention Team. 3 attorneys. the regional director of the North Carolina Veterans Service Organization, and a retired colonel named Harris, who held a joint appointment with the JAG Corps, and whose particular specialty was exactly this kind of property and land rights case. And, behind them, moving with the contained deliberateness of a man who has received information that has changed the priority of his afternoon, was Judge Arthur Pemberton, Chief Judge of the 4th District, who had driven from his office 6 blocks away in 11 minutes, and who had not called ahead because there had not been time. He was 67 years old, 30 years on the bench. And he was carrying a manila folder, and he stopped in the hallway and looked at Eugene Cobb on the bench with the gray felt hat in his hands, and he looked for a moment with an expression that was not quite professional and not entirely personal, but lived between the two. "Eugene Cobb," Judge Pemberton said. Eugene looked up. "Judge, you filed the wrong date. I did. You were in the hospital. I was. The VSO should have been involved in this case from the beginning." Pemberton looked at the manila folder in his hand. "We're going to fix the beginning." He looked at Marcus Webb. "Bailiff Webb, is Judge Fitch between cases?" "She has a 10-minute recess, sir." "Good." He looked at the attorneys. "We're going back in." Courtroom 4 reassembled itself with the particular efficiency of a room that has been told by its hierarchy that efficiency is currently required. The VSO attorneys arrayed themselves at the plaintiff's table alongside the relieved and slightly stunned Aldridge. The regional director took a seat in the gallery. Colonel Harris stood. Judge Fitch entered from chambers and stopped. Judge Pemberton was sitting in the gallery. He was not behind the bench. He was in the gallery, which was not where chief judges sat, and his presence in the gallery communicated something that the room absorbed and processed without needing it explained. He nodded to her. She took the bench. She looked at the VSO attorneys. She looked at Colonel Harris. She looked at Eugene Cobb, back in the 3rd row, gray felt hat on the seat beside him, the dark suit with the ribbon now pinned to the lapel, outside now, visible, not turned inward, because Marcus Webb had asked him quietly in the hall if he would consider it, and Eugene had looked at the younger man for a moment, and then pinned it where it was meant to go. Judge Fitch looked at the ribbon. She looked at Colonel Harris. "Your Honor," Harris said, "the petitioner moves for emergency reconsideration under Rule 60B, grounds of excusable neglect, specifically medical hospitalization preventing timely communication with counsel. We are prepared to submit hospital records, attending physician declaration, and a complete case file." He paused. "We are also prepared, if the court wishes, to submit for the record the service documentation of the petitioner, which is directly relevant to the equitable considerations the court may wish to weigh." "Submit everything," Judge Fitch said. Her voice had not changed its register, but something in it had. Harris set the file on the clerk's desk. The clerk received it. "The petitioner's service record," Harris said, addressing the room now, with the deliberateness of a man who understands that a room is sometimes the audience a record deserves. "Eugene Chester Cobb, United States Army, 1953 to 1975. Korea, 1953, Dominican Republic, 1965, Vietnam, 2 tours, 1967 to 1969. He turned to page. The Silver Star with Valor device was awarded for actions on August 14, 1968, near the village of Benich Fitz, Mekong Delta. The citation reads, he found the line, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action against the enemy, Staff Sergeant Cobb, without regard for his personal safety, voluntarily exposed himself to withering enemy fire to draw hostile attention from a surrounded and isolated fire team, enabling the destruction of the enemy position and the recovery of 3 wounded personnel. Staff Sergeant Cobb sustained serious wounds to his right hand in the execution of this action and continued to direct his squad through successful withdrawal despite his injuries. Harris set the page down. The loss of 2 fingers on his right hand is documented as a direct result of this action. He has carried that injury for 57 years. The courtroom held its breath. Harris looked at the bench. The petitioner is 84 years old. The property in question has been in his family since 1931. His grandfather built the house on it. 3 generations have been born in that house. He paused. He filed 3 days late because he was in the hospital recovering from a cardiac event and did not want to burden his attorney with the information until he felt he could discuss it clearly. That is the kind of man he is. That is why we are here. Judge Fitch looked at Eugene Cobb. He was looking back at her. Those dark, patient eyes. The large, weathered hands folded on his knees. The ribbon on the lapel, small and precise, the silver V catching the fluorescent light of the courtroom. She looked at it for a long moment. "Motion for reconsideration granted," she said. "Case is reinstated. Opposing counsel will have until close of business Friday to respond to the emergency filing." She set down her pen. She did not reach for the next file. She sat for a moment in the particular stillness of someone who is letting something settle before she moves on. "Mr. Cobb, Your Honor, your attorney will speak for you in this court," she said. "But I'm glad you spoke for yourself this morning." She brought the gavel down. Not with the declarative finality of the first time, with something quieter, something that was also a beginning. In the corridor outside courtroom 4, after the room had dispersed, and the attorneys had gathered their files, and the regional director had shaken Eugene's hand, and Aldridge had stood to the side with the expression of a young lawyer who has just watched his career's most instructive morning. Marcus Webb fell into step beside Eugene Cobb as he moved toward the exit. They walked for a moment without speaking. "Your father's going to hear about all of this," Eugene said. "He's going to call me before I get to my car," Webb said. "Tell him I said hello. I will." Webb paused. "Sir, why did you have the ribbon turned inward this whole time?" Eugene walked for a moment without answering. The courthouse lobby opened up ahead of them, the main entrance, the afternoon light coming in through the glass doors, the ordinary world of Fayetteville going about its business outside. "Because I didn't come here for that," Eugene said. "I came here for the land." He adjusted the felt hat. "The ribbon is for what happened on a road in the Delta 57 years ago, and the people who were on that road with me. It's not for courtrooms." He paused, but Webb, and he used the name the way he had once used names like that, the last name directness of a man who had spent time in circumstances where last names were the currency of identity. Sometimes the quiet thing has to become visible, or the people in the room don't know what they're looking at. He pushed through the glass door. The afternoon light found him, the weathered face, the broad shoulders, the ribbon on the lapel of the dark suit, the gray felt hat settling into place. And then the ordinary world of Fayetteville received him, and he was gone, moving at his own pace, carrying what he carried without display, the way he had always done it. There are men who come to courtrooms and government buildings and bureaucratic windows carrying evidence of who they are and what they gave, and they keep it turned inward because they did not do what they did in order to be seen doing it. They did it because the road required it, and they were on the road, and that was that. But sometimes the room doesn't know what it has. Sometimes the quiet thing has to become visible. And in those moments, if you are paying attention, if you see the ribbon, or the hands, or the way he straightens when he rises, or the specific patience in the eyes of a man who has waited out worse things than a procedural ruling, you will understand that you are in the presence of something the ordinary world moves past, without noticing every single day. And you will be grateful that today, at least, you did not. If you were moved by Eugene Cobb's story of quiet courage and timeless wisdom, hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to see it, and be sure to subscribe to Veterans Valor for more stories of America's unassuming heroes.